Most are aware of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the bombings that brought a decisive end to World War II. What is less known, though, is that the U.S. had an inventory of 50 additional bombs waiting offshore to be used against Japan. The U.S. was willing to suppress Japan's military and civilians with the terrifying new technology of the atom bomb. This new technology and its creator were the focus of the 2023 hit film Oppenheimer. The Oppenheimer film closes with a distinctive scene showing the little boy and fat man bombs being driven away to their mission, the final step of the Manhattan Project known as Project Alberta. Project Alberta is often overlooked, as it was in the movie, and that's unfortunate as the project had many interesting aspects. Project Alberta may have employed just 51 of the 110,000 people who worked on the Manhattan Project, but it had the most critical parts of the effort. Project Alberta was entirely devoted to the weaponization and delivery of the atomic bomb, taking a bullet and putting it into a gun. Project Alberta was started in June of 1943 when General Groves, assigned the ordnance lead, Captain Parsons. Captain Parsons was assigned to run Project Alberta because he had just finished the proximity fuse. It was used in anti-aircraft capacities and was well respected by his peers, and it was a perfect fit for the highly demanding role that lay ahead of him. The first step was to select an aircraft that would offer the necessary power and space to carry the large bombs. The Avro Lancaster was the only aircraft at the start of Project Alberta that, with some modification, could meet the 17-foot by 23-inch requirements needed to fit the proposed bomb dimensions of Little Boy. This option was quickly rejected given the powerful bomber was not a homegrown product. Instead, the new B-29 aircraft was chosen, with its 25-foot by 64-inch bomb bay, and most importantly, it was American-made. The new bomber was barely beyond the prototype stage, though, and most new B-29s would often fly straight from the factory to modification depots to be retrofitted and improved ahead of deployment. Working with aircraft designers, a new version of the aircraft known as the Silver Plate variant was produced. The Silver Plate variant was 7,000 pounds lighter, sporting just a tail gunner instead of the usual 5 gunners. In addition, it had feathered propellers, allowing for quicker stopping and reverse capabilities. The new plane helped in test drops during the fall of 1943, starting with a crude dummy bomb dropped at the Dahlgren Proving Grounds in Virginia, where the bomb produced less than desirable aerodynamics. Spotting room for improvement, General Groves engaged the Bureau of Standards to design an aerodynamic casing and arranged for Heavy Metal Industries in Detroit to construct the enormous bomb casings. And by March of 1944, Muroc Dry Lake in California, which is now known as Edwards Air Force Base, began hosting full-scale testing of Little Boy and Fat Man with Silver Plate variant B-29s. The testing was by no means smooth sailing. The flight characteristics for the newly improved bomb cases still suffered from poor performance, with dummy bombs rarely hitting the targets. And prior to the drop, the B-29s would often overheat when reaching 35,000 feet in altitude, and even when at the prescribed altitude, the bomb bay doors would often get stuck. While problems mounted, solutions came quickly. Through high-speed photography, one cause for the bomb's inaccuracy was found. The fins of the bomb could not handle the pressure from the fast-moving air, and the fins would bend under the high pressure immediately after release. The implication of this finding went beyond the Manhattan Project and was in effect hindering many conventional bomb designs being used by the U.S. military at the time. An additional fix was found by welding metal plates at 45-degree angles in the tail of the bomb to increase drag at the tail and create a sort of parachute. This modification worked amazingly, and the bomb was observed to be totally stable in flight. Other smart changes were also made to the bomb. An addition of a 15-second detonation delay for the bomb's ground radar was added to prevent early detonation. Without the 15-second delay, and if the bomb immediately rolled belly up after release, it could mistake the drop plane as the ground and detonate, killing the crew members high above its target at 30,000 feet. With the bomb and aircraft procedures progressing, the fall of 1944 brought the next step of the project, training the bomb crews of the 509th Composite Group at Wendover Air Force Base, situated on the western edge of Utah. Almost the entirety of the base was in the dark as to the true nature of the mission. Only a handful of personnel, including Colonel Tibbets, knew of the true purpose for the extensive testing being done on what were called pumpkin bombs. Colonel Tibbets is perhaps the most famous person behind Oppenheimer in the Manhattan Project, known for being the pilot of the Enola Gay. At the base, Colonel Tibbets led the bomb crews in endless training exercises, but less than 5 people at the base knew of the project's true intentions. The pumpkin bombs, which were prototypes for Fat Man, were nicknamed for their large, round size and golden hue, a color that came from the manufacturing process and metallurgical treatment applied. Little boy drop testing briefly happened in the high deserts of Inyo Kern, California, until the ground was found to be too soft after multiple drops buried themselves too far to be recovered. Those little boy casings are likely still in the ground there to this day, waiting to be recovered. Given the difficulties at Inyo Kern, all tests were brought to Wendover, where testing reached a height of 1 pumpkin being dropped per day. The extensive testing was done to detect and correct any issue to ensure absolute reliability of all bomb components. Meanwhile, a destination for the bomb's delivery had been selected. The captured island of Tinian, north of Guam by 100 miles. The island had several benefits in that it had the largest operating airfield with 4 runways, and most importantly for stealth. Hundreds of B-29s were already stationed on the island, so adding a few more B-29s would hardly raise any suspicion. Commander Ashworth oversaw the construction of loading pits and 3 buildings. 1 building for Fat Man, 1 building for Little Boy, and 1 building for test bombs. The Silver Plate code word, while recognized within the military as a get it done with no questions kind of mantra, the typical low-level courier remained ignorant to the phrase. Many of the crates containing critical components were victims of their own secrecy, often ending up delayed or misplaced during transportation to Tinian. Perhaps the most famous aspect of the delivery operation was because of the attack that sank the USS Indianapolis. The cruiser had a delayed departure, only leaving just a few hours after the Trinity test successfully demonstrated the power of the atom bomb, setting sail from San Francisco's Hunters Point Naval Shipyard on July 16th. The cruiser made record time delivering the Little Boy bomb parts, including nuclear components, to Tinian on July 26th. After which the ship was struck by 2 Japanese torpedoes and sunk on July 30th, with hundreds of souls lost, many to shark attacks in the deep Pacific. The attack regained widespread attention after its terrifying sinking was retold in the 1975 hit movie Jaws. By July 1945, nearly the entirety of the Manhattan Project was now focused on Tinian, with scientists having arrived from Los Alamos on the island along with the 509th Composite Group who would conduct the mission. Drop tests were conducted near Tinian, and by the end of July, the pumpkin bombs were being dropped on cities across Japan. Cities targeted in the dress rehearsal bombings included Fukushima, Kobe, and Osaka. The dress rehearsals were largely successful, paving the pattern of the flight profile to be taken, including the drop and hard turn to avoid the anticipated nuclear blast. Most importantly, it validated that the Japanese military simply wasn't going to be concerned about a small number of B-29s and would likely not take efforts to mount air defenses. In addition, to reduce civilian casualties as much as possible, thousands of leaflets were dropped on various cities, warning of imminent destruction. On August 2nd, the Little Boy device had been fully assembled and was ready for use. The go-ahead came on August 5th, when Parsons received direction to drop Little Boy on Hiroshima. One small procedural change ensured safety, but frustrated General Groves. The Little Boy was disarmed before liftoff in the hopes that if the Enola Gay, piloted by Colonel Tibbets, crashed on liftoff, that the entire island, along with the Fat Man bomb, weren't lost to an accidental detonation. The bombing on August 6th of Hiroshima went to plan, and the biggest foul-up being that the dedicated camera's film for the drop test was not processed correctly, and no official footage of the detonation exists today. The only footage of Hiroshima was taken by Harold Agnew, a scientist flying on an observation plane with Enola Gay using his handheld Hasselblad camera. During the approach, the Enola Gay had been spotted by the Japanese military, and the sighting was reported, but no efforts were made to defend the skies from a small group of B-29s, as was expected. The bombing was successful, but Washington, D.C. did not hear about it for many hours due to a communication gap. So, in classic corporate fashion, the bombing did not occur until leadership knew of its success. Once President Truman announced the use of the bomb with its 20 kiloton yield, the personnel on Tinian were caught off guard as the calculations on the size of the bomb were actually still being made. The 20 kiloton estimate had actually been made by Parsons, who was aboard the Enola Gay during the bombing, and compared the explosion to what he saw at the Trinity test the month prior, and concluded the little boy explosion was a bit larger. 2 days later, to continue what must have been terror for the Japanese people, 2 more pumpkin bombs were dropped on August 8th. Preparation for Fat Man's use were not so straightforward. The bomb suffered a miswiring the night before use, and the bomb casing had been changed to utilize an armored shell. A change made to improve resiliency to possible flak, which could render the bomb a dud. These physical changes, though, prevented the bomb from fitting nicely inside the casing and instead resulted in a 1/4-inch gap between the case segments. The gaps could allow moisture in and render the bomb useless. The solution selected was none other than duct tape. Military-grade duct tape, of course, but still, it was duct tape. The tape was applied around the gaps, followed by a red sealant to fill any missed spots by the tape, and then a black sealer paint was applied on top. This gave Fat Man the famous bumblebee look it's known for in its final photos. On August 9th, Boxcar, the B-29 carrying Fat Man and Major Sweeney's crew, took flight, where problems immediately arose. A fuel pump broke, which left the bomber with 600 gallons less of fuel than expected. The bomb also indicated to the flight engineer that it was armed, even though it had not been deliberately set to an armed position. If this had not been discovered and the plane had to land for any reason, the bomb would have detonated after crossing the 1,750-foot mark in altitude. This wiring issue was corrected in flight to return the bomb to a normal status. Then hours later, and after arriving on the primary target, Kokura, the weather was bad and the bombing was called off. So Major Sweeney then piloted the Boxcar 100 miles southwest to the backup target, Nagasaki, still low on fuel. On approach, Nagasaki was also covered in clouds, but at the last moment, the clouds cleared and visual identification of the target was made. The bomb missed the largest population center and instead destroyed the Mitsubishi Heavy Industries plant on the edge of the city. The missing of this target no doubt saved civilian life, yet was more effective in that it squarely leveled a military target. Shortly after dropping Fat Man, Boxcar turned back towards Okinawa and, short on fuel, Major Sweeney called a mayday, but received no response. Hours later, and approaching Okinawa, Major Sweeney radioed the tower to clear all traffic for their immediate arrival. But there was no response from the tower. Running low on fuel, a member of the flight crew was instructed to fire flares to gain attention from the ground. The crew member unknowingly fired all different colored flares, each with its own meaning. From land, response personnel knew that an aircraft was approaching, and judging from the flare colors, it was out of fuel, it was on fire, had wounded, and needed immediate assistance. After a rough landing, and being surrounded by every ground resource on Okinawa, Major Sweeney quickly moved to the base's headquarters to communicate the news of the successful bombing. These 2 successful drops marked the end of Project Alberta, and after Little Boy's success, many of the scientists quickly began booking trips home. Part of the quick departure may have been Tinian's terrible year-round weather, nearly 90 degrees most months, and 100% humidity every single day. And although the bombs were successful, the U.S. kept its foot on the gas, keeping up the terror for the Japanese by flying yet another group of B-29s over Japan and bombing 2 more cities with pumpkin bombs on August 14th. That's just one day before the Japanese surrendered on August 15th, bringing an end to World War II. During Project Alberta, the U.S. did have 50 or so bombs on Tinian, but only 2 had nuclear material. The other 16 bombs dropped on Japanese cities were filled with conventional explosives. More nuclear material was ready to be shipped by August 13th from Los Alamos, but it was ultimately held up on a decision from General Groves. Quote, "It would be terrible for us to send overseas the ingredients of another atomic bomb," Groves would later write in his book recounting the events of the Manhattan Project. And by September 17th, Tinian had very little left on it from Project Alberta. With all the scientists having left and any bomb materials having been shipped back to Los Alamos, or, when appropriate, tossed into the depths of the Pacific Ocean, the Mariana Trench not being too far away. Tinian today now only has 2 loading pits accompanied by a few plaques that provide information to visitors regarding Tinian's role in the Manhattan Project. The rest of the world, though, has had to wrestle with the reality of atomic bombs and their devastating power. I made this video using a prototype video generator that I've been casually building over the past couple of years. Let me know in the comments what you liked and didn't like.